Hello, welcome to another edition of Prove All Things. I want to thank everybody who's joining us today, whether you're watching live on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, or joining us on the CGI Digital Network app, whether on your phone or through our television app on Roku or Apple TV, or watch. Most people are probably watching this later or listening to this later. We thank you for joining Prove All Things. I'm joined with co-host Mike James. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Jeff, good to be with you here today. We're getting some really good weather here in California now. We're getting highs of about 83 and lows of about 63 at night. So I'm really glad we got off that 105 degree weather we were in there for a while.
Yeah, you still have a drought out there though, don't you?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that.
Yeah.
Rain is few and far between here for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully keep praying for you out there. Hopefully, things get better. And I know you've had electricity problems and whatnot, I guess, because of the heat.
Yeah, definitely. They were talking about rationing the electricity and maybe going into rolling blackouts, especially in Los Angeles County. I'm right next door in San Bernardino County, and we were not impacted with any rolling blackouts, but definitely it was a conversation that had begun amongst the government officials here.
Wow. Yep. Well, it was good to see you again. Good to be here. Definitely glad to have everybody who's joining us today. We're getting really close to the feast. We're really close to the Feast of Trumpets, just less than a week away, and that's always
it's hard to believe, man.
Yeah, that's when you know, especially for the ministry, that's when you know you really gotta start getting ready for the feast if you haven't got all your sermons together. And if you haven't planned for the feast now, I don't know. You just go somewhere and show up, I guess, because it's close. Only 3 weeks away.
Definitely. Where are you going to be heading, Jeff?
I'll be in Myrtle Beach for the beginning, and then one day I'll be down in St. Pete, and then back to Myrtle Beach. So
okay. I'm going to start out in St. Pete, and I'm going to finish up in Medina, Ohio.
All right, Medina, Ohio. Speaking of Medina, Ohio, we have the pastor from Medina, Ohio, who is actually joining us live today as well. How you doing, Bill?
Doing okay. How you guys doing?
Okay, Bill.
That's good. That's good. Glad to hear, Mike, you're getting some good weather over there. Boy, I've seen some pictures of Lake Mead and talking about drought. Wow, just unbelievable pictures and footage of that lake receding. You know, it's just amazing. Yeah.
All these old boats are being found. Dead bodies are being found there.
They may find Jimmy Hoffa sooner or later. Yeah. Lake Powell too. I guess is also.
Yeah. That's true. Two of the biggest lakes out there in the West, and the Las Vegas is so close to Lake Mead that they think that one of the bodies they found may have been a hit job by the mob many years ago.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess not everything does stay in Las Vegas, huh?
Good one, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad, guys. Yeah, good to have you here, Bill. And we're glad Mike's out there to keep everybody straight, I guess, before any more of God's judgment comes to California. So we will see about that. So how you been doing, Bill?
Good. Talking about the feast, we've got things all ready too over there in Clearwater. That site is a distinctive site sponsored by CGI 100%, but primarily the Medina congregation. And we'll be there at the, the Edge Hotel. We relocated actually our meeting hall from the Holiday Inn Clearwater right next door to the Edge. It's called the
Mm,
Edge Hotel, or I guess it is hotel. Yeah, I guess it'd be the Edge Hotel. And we're
okay.
being put up on the 6th floor master ballroom called the Edge Water, I think it is, on the 6th floor, ballrooms 1 and 2. And it's a beautiful site overlooking the city of Clearwater, going north with the ocean to the left out west. And you've got a walkout patio, balcony, you can walk out on and take a look at things through sliding doors that are adjacent to the meeting hall. So we're pretty much, we've got all our functions set up and ready to rock and roll, as they would say. Anybody that would be planning on coming to that Clearwater site sure would appreciate those filling out the survey for the site. Fill it out and send it to my Bill W at cgi.org website, or email address, so that I would know exactly, again, how many folks are coming and our setup. It'll help us to organize a little bit better. In addition, let me just interject this too in regards to Medina, which is a feast site. Mike, I think you mentioned you're going to be going to Medina as well. Tony is getting everything pretty much set up there. That's Tony Buchert. He'll be coordinating that site. I'll be at Clearwater, but Tony will be up in Medina. He too has a survey located at the CGI Medina website, cgimedina.org website, and there's a survey for Tony as well. And again, these surveys have been very helpful to us in helping us organize our events and planning on how many people are going to be attending certain functions after and outside of services. And Tony, I know also, because he was just at services last Sabbath, would appreciate any who are planning on coming to the Medina, Ohio site to fill out that specific survey too, which is also, as I say, located at the cgimedina.org website. Fill it out and then send it to where Tony says to send it there after you fill it out. That would be greatly appreciated from both he and I.
All right, wonderful. So yeah, the feast is soon. The feast is soon. We are definitely excited about it. And I guess asking you about your topic today, Bill, I'm definitely intrigued by your email and the premise of it. If you would explain what you're going to talk about, and hopefully everybody out there can start formulating questions and ideas of.
Yeah, I wanted to address the subject of prophecy today a little bit, and certainly approach it from a balanced point of view. I would hope that as we go through it and discuss a little bit about why prophecy is important, and it does have a role to play in the gospel. I mean, a lot of people today seem to have hesitations surrounding the subject of prophecy, because there's just so much information out there, and so many narratives and scenarios and things that are from, aliens up in Antarctica to the earth being flat and all kinds of stuff that, people's heads are spinning. And so I wanted to take some time just to kind of discuss with you guys as well, and certainly interject, add to what you'd like to contribute as well, to discuss this on a balanced way, and also through the course of the presentation, perhaps touch on some rules of studying prophecy, so that you don't go off the rails. Because I'll tell you, as well as I do, prophecy is probably one of the most abused subjects of preaching the gospel that there is. And it's easy to do, because any kind of Tom, Dick, or Harry can, assign any kind of interpretation in some cases to what they believe to be suited for the narrative they're trying to pass. Like, remember that guy, Harold, what was his name? Harold
Camping.
Yeah. Where he had Jesus coming back a couple of times, and he had to rewrite his script, I guess, and go back to his calculator and figure out where he made his mistakes on a calculation. And yet people believe, I mean, that's the sad part about it. There were people following that guy, by the way, a little digression here, that literally put in their whole life savings, who were buying these big billboards and that, advertising the fact Christ was coming back at a certain time. And I think you remember all of that stuff, and the Y2K thing, and so many other items of predictions that people have used and strayed from really the Bible.
Well, I think the entire, if you look at the entire history of the church, and the different factions of the church, there's always been someone saying that Christ was coming soon, and they had predictions of dates and set times. I know, and maybe that's a lot why a lot of people may be tired of prophecy, because maybe at one point they were thinking this was it, and they got disappointed in some of those beliefs. I know when I was a kid, I was going to a Pentecostal church, and they were telling me back in 1981, they said, "This is it. Every day we see all the signs are out there. Jesus is probably coming back in the next year, maybe 2 years, because they believed in the rapture and stuff." And that's been what, 40 years ago, that they were thinking and kind of think, yeah, maybe next couple of years. I was tuning in on a similar, I would say similar channel to ours, that streams, just to kind of see what kind of content they had. And the first thing I clicked on was a couple of guys, and they're like, "Hey guys, we're so close to the rapture, we just don't know. We just believe it's going to be here any day now." I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
There's still people saying that. 40 years later, they just that's the thing about prophecy, is that you have so many people out there with so many different ideas, and usually it's that Jesus is coming back pretty soon.
Yeah, and they get misdirected on a lot of this stuff. To your point, I mean, the Worldwide Church of God, our culture, where we, came from back in I remember I was baptized back in 71. 1974, was the big deal. We were all going to go to Petra, this place of safety, which was nothing more than a kind of a quasi-rapture doctrine as well, except we weren't going to be wafted off to heaven or onto the sea of glass. We were going to be just kind of transported physically via airplane, boats, or I don't know, whatever else, helicopters perhaps, to Jordan. But even with that being said, I think there's, to your point, Jeff, a exhaustion that is associated with always being at the lap gun, so to speak, where, oh, he's coming back. And then lo and behold, he's not, and I think the Millerite movement back, William Miller back in the 1840s is kind of set the tone of that kind of historical type of condition, environment, and attitude that people, you tend to get exhausted, and then you become
or disappointed, because that was called the Great Disappointment.
That's true.
So people become disappointed, and that's the thing, is prophecy should not be there to disappoint people.
No,
there's a lot that we can learn, a lot we can learn about the world and about our lives from prophecy.
That's right.
And it's not there to disappoint you. It's there to give you hope.
Absolutely. And instruction, and hopefully a heads up, and FYI, because prophecy is history in advance. I mean, the reason we look to understand prophecy is so that we can recognize events before they happen, so that when they happen, we can recognize the fact that they are indeed from God. And that's an important aspect. And that's a principle in prophecy that even God uses. I mean, he talks about knowing, the past back there in Isaiah. I think it is here, I've got it written down. I think it was Isaiah 46 and also 44, where he talks about knowing the past. You got to know history. There's a certain element of value in knowing history, so that you can see patterns throughout the course of history and understand how God works, because God does indeed work in patterns. The holy days are a perfect illustration of those patterns, and we go back and we review them every year. And that's a pattern that God wants us to have ingrained in our minds, so that we've got that thumbnail sketch of what he's doing and how he's doing it, and how he's bringing to fruition this whole plan, the salvific plan of reproduction that he's had going since Adam and Eve. And that's important for us to understand, that there is a value in history. As a matter of fact, I remember years ago, and this takes me to my first point, frankly, that I wanted to share with everybody and you guys, and certainly, again, you guys can, butt in anytime you want. But I remember I think it was a 7, back in the day, it was cassette tapes, but it was 7 of them that Ron Dart did. I don't know if Blake would have copies of that old course that Ron did back in the 70s and in the 80s and 90s of CGI, but he actually did it in the 70s, because in talking with Ron back when I had opportunity to speak with him when he was alive, he had mentioned to me that this 7-hour course was his Old Testament survey course that he taught at Ambassador, that he put into these 7 hours of cassette tapes. And it's called History and Prophecy. and that was the title of it. I think Blake might have it. I've got my copy here.
Yeah, Bill, he actually does have it, and he wanted me to send him my 7 cassettes, which he found out I had, so he could re-record it. That's what they do there, is they re-record some of these cassette tapes that people have out there from Ron, just to make sure that they've got that on CD for later. Great. Yeah,
good deal.
It is on the CEM website for anyone that wants to listen to that. And you can also get it from CEM. But let me just offer that I listened to that, Bill, within the last 6 months, and it brought to mind some things that I had forgotten about prophecy that are so important to better understand prophecy. So anybody out there who's not listened to those, please do, because it's very enlightening.
Yeah, and though this is an unsolicited advertisement, to your point, Mike, it is critical, because the value of those 7 hours and that Old Testament survey course that Ron taught is that it puts the prophets in timelines. It helps you to understand who was alive when, what group of people, whether it was Judah in the south or Israel in the north, were they talking to, and the value of those conversations or warnings, threats, illuminations that these particular prophets, whether it was Isaiah, who primarily was alive during the northern 10 tribes and the invasion of Assyria back in the 700s, the 8th century, or Jeremiah 120 years later in Judah and the Babylonian invasions. I mean, those are important distinctions to make regarding the prophets, because as you then read in the writings of these prophets, you begin to see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, what can apply to the historical value of the voice of that prophet, and what isn't applicable to his timeline, and that he's actually talking out into the future, which is another point I want to talk about, but I don't want to get ahead of myself yet here. But my point is, there are preterists, people that will relegate the prophets to history. It's all history, relegate them down to historical accountants, basically, and that there's no prophetic value, no futuristic value to anything they wrote, and consequently we just had to relegate them into this category of, well, they're historians, and that's baloney. You know, that's just pure baloney.
Yeah,
I think there's a lack of faith when they do that.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lack of faith, because they try to say, well, all this was written afterwards.
Yeah.
So that they were just recording the history. They say Daniel, which gives us, the forecast of these coming kingdom, 4 kingdoms, and 2 of them were there. They say, well, that was written during the Roman Empire, so they knew about all 4 kingdoms because Daniel didn't write it. So that's just saying you don't believe it.
Exactly.
If you're trying to say that's history.
And how they do that, I mean, to be a preterist, you have to ignore scriptures like this. Isaiah 46, verse 10. I'll go back to this and quote it. There is none like me. I'm quoting now from Isaiah. There is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning. Now, he's stating, declaring the end from the beginning. He's saying, hey, look, I'm going to tell you the whole enchilada here. I'm going to give you the whole story. I'm going to tell you everything. And basically, prophecy does. It's a broad scope, agreed, admitted. But nevertheless, the fact remains here, according to this prophet Isaiah, God is giving us all there is to give. So the whole story is captured in Genesis through Revelation. That's what we're being told here. And he's the Alpha. Remember, we're told in Revelation, and he's the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. From the ancient times, things that are not done, not yet done. Here's another one, Isaiah 41. I made a misspoke. I thought it was 45. It's Isaiah 41, verse 22. This one, in addition to 46:10. This is 41:22. Let them bring them forward and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things, that's history, what they be, so that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare us things for to come. So to understand the future, it's important that we understand history, without a doubt, but be careful about relegating all things to just historical value. And you know,
Yeah, even in the book of Daniel, Bill, just to continue on what you were saying there, the angel tells Daniel, go your way, you're going to rest, and
yeah,
then the end is going to come. What I'm telling you now is not
yeah,
for you to figure out. It's going to
Mhm.
happen later. You're going to rest, meaning he's going to be dead. He's going to be asleep, and then you're going to come back. But all this is going to transpire at this end time,
he
So
was even
yeah,
told to shut the book up. He
right,
said,
Mhm.
right,
shut the book up. It's for the latter time. It doesn't pertain to you,
Mhm.
exactly.
And that's the thing that we've got to understand too. And sadly, I think a lot of people have fell victim of this, but we've got to be careful about the fact of trying to project too much. Like you were saying, I think, Jeff, before, and to your point, even going back to the days of the apostles, they thought they were in the latter days. The apostle Paul said
Mhm.
and thoroughly believed that the man of perdition was going to come into the temple that he was still in the shadow of, figuratively speaking, of course, but alive while the temple was still there, because the temple had not yet been razed or destroyed by Titus yet. And Paul saying that he felt that certainly the man of perdition was going to find himself in that particular temple there that was standing while Paul was still alive. So even they thought that there was no way 2,000 plus years would pass before Jesus would return.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Acts 1:6. They say, hey, when are you gonna take over? When are you gonna start the kingdom? He asked him in Acts 1:6. He says, listen, it's not for you to know about this. It's gonna be. He doesn't tell them, but it's 2,000 years since they thought it was gonna happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let me just cut here to the chase real quick, guys, on this first point about this timeline, putting the prophets in timeline. Let me turn to Jeremiah chapter 30. I don't know, Jeff, you can put that up there, but Jeremiah
Let
chapter
me find
30
that.
is an illustration of what I'm kind of talking about here with regard to knowing history and yet being able to identify the prophet's timeline when he was alive, because this now becomes important in this narrative of chapter 30 of the book of Jeremiah. All of us, I think, know, at least maybe we don't, but many of us know that Jeremiah lived during the day and age when Babylon was invading Judah. Israel, the nation Israel, had already been taken captive. They're gone. They're already migrating. They're up in the Caucasus. They're up by the Caspian Sea area. They're in and have been absorbed into the old Assyrian Empire. They're already crossbreeding and intermarrying with those folks. That's all.
That was like what 130 years earlier or
That's
so.
right,
I mean,
Jeff.
a long
Exactly.
time had passed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
about 120, 130 years earlier. And
Yeah.
so here now we're down. Isaiah's dead. Jeremiah now's alive. Jeremiah's alive with Ezekiel, by the way. He's also alive with Daniel. The three of them are contemporary among each other. But in this case, Jeremiah, he's down in the front lines. He's still over there in Palestine. And he writes this. He says in verse for the sake of time, I'll just go to verse 2. Thus speaks the Lord God of Israel, saying, while you all write you all the words that I have spoken unto you in a book. Okay, verse 3 now. For lo, and let me say this. Up to this point, through almost 29 chapters of the book of Jeremiah, it's pretty historical. There's some smidgens of prophetic writ in there that point to the future that are obvious. They talk about the kingdom of God. They talk about a large exodus at the beginning of the millennium. There's a lot of things that they pop out at you that are definitely prophetic. But for the most part, a lot of what is written in those first 29 chapters, agreed, is historical and pertains to Jeremiah's timeline. But then all of a sudden, almost like out of context, he comes into verse 30 here and he brings Israel. Now, Israel, to your point, Jeff, is gone. It's been gone 130 years ago.
Yes.
Now he's going to bring in this term Israel. And he's making a distinction because he says here, for lo, verse 3, the days come, says the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel. Well, now, wait a minute. How can the captivity be again when there is no Israel and Israel never returned to begin with? So this is a prophecy. This has no application to Jeremiah.
Right.
It's time because there is no Israel, number one. Number two, Israel of old, the original ancient Israel, never returned back to Palestine. So Israel, what he's talking about here, is still outstanding. He goes on and he says,
Well, I'll ask you. So critics would say, I'm going to give you a critical what people would say about what you're saying. They would say that there's evidence that in Scripture that many from the northern tribes had migrated down to the southern kingdom, and so you had members of all tribes in the southern kingdom, even though the majority had left 120 years earlier. So the the critics of what you're saying would say, well, are they talking about the southern kingdom, or is there a way to tell the difference here?
but I think hardly that would be defined as, or a
Right.
legitimate definition of a nation being
Right.
returned again. Because yes, there were some northern Israelites, to your point, that got scared, ran, and merged with the Jewish people and the Benjamites and Levites down there in the south. But that hardly defines here what Isaiah or what Jeremiah is saying, because you'll see
Yeah.
this in a minute, Jeff, where he says here, "The captivity of my people Israel and Judah." So to your point, if indeed that would be a qualifying, legitimate rationale, why would he identify Judah as well as Israel? He's definitely talking about two different people.
Two separate countries. Two separate
Yeah.
countries are being identified.
And if I may, Bill, you're going to get to this a little bit later, but Jeff, as we get into this prophecy, Bill is going to relate things that could not have happened yet at this time in history. They have never happened, and they couldn't happen, and the language will bear that out, as Bill will, I'm sure, get to.
Yeah,
Yes.
and breaking that down to where you're talking about, Mike, he says here, verse 4, "These are the words that the Lord spoke concerning," and again he makes a distinction, Israel and concerning Judah. He goes on and he talks about, "Ask you now and see whether a man does travail with child." He's talking about a very threatening environment that, figuratively speaking, the men are shaking. They're in travail. Men with their hands in their loins, women in travail, and all the faces are turned into paleness. Alas, it's the day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time. Now, this includes Judah. Jacob's trouble, because these are all 12 boys. It's Jacob's trouble, all of it, not just the northern. We're talking about Judah too, and he's been including Judah as well along the way through the preceding verses here. So this is Jacob's trouble, including the Jews. In other words, what we see today in Palestine, in order for it to again go into captivity again, that country is going to be invaded and occupied.
Hey, Bill, if I could offer the NIV version of that verse 7, "How awful that day will be, none will be like it." And again, if you couple this with what we read in Revelation about the tribulation, that it is going to be a time of trouble that the world has never seen, then obviously this could not be any time that Israel was back in the land, because there's been much worse that has occurred on the earth since that time. And this says that there will be no day like it.
Right.
Okay? So,
And to your point, Bill, Ezekiel was also a contemporary at this time.
Right.
And if you read in the book of Ezekiel, God tells them, it says, "I'm going to tell you what to tell them, but they don't care. They're not going to listen to you."
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So why write it down if they're not going to listen?
Yeah.
If it's not for something for the future generations to get.
Well, he goes on here, Jeremiah does, and he says, "For it shall come to pass that day, says the Lord of hosts, that I will break." Now he says this, "I will break his yoke." The day is going to come when I'm going to break his being the enemy, yoke off your, meaning Israel and Judah's, neck. In other words, a day's coming when you will be freed from the captivity and or the destruction again. So he says here, "It shall come to pass that day," the day's coming, the Lord of hosts, "that I will break your enemy's yoke off your neck, and will burst your bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of you, but they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them." So right here, Mike, right here, Jeff, we're being at the beginning of the millennium. We have just taken Jacob out of the trouble that Jacob has. He's going to be freed from that captivity. And if you put this together with Jeremiah 31, which I don't think we'll have time to go, but if you go, and I'll just put it up there for consideration, verses 8 through 11, Jeff, you'll see these are people like refugees coming out of captivity at the beginning of the millennium to establish the nation of Israel, a physical nation of physical human beings who survive that tribulation and will make up the nation of Israel. And these will be refugees of the former cultures that defined Israel and Judah. And he goes on here and he says in verse 10, therefore, fear you not, my servant Jacob, says the Lord. Don't fear, neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save you from afar, and your seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return and be in rest and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid, for I am with you, verse 11, says the Lord, to save you, though I make a full end of all nations where I've scattered you, yet I will not make a full end of you, but I will correct you in measure and will not leave you altogether unpunished. And so he proceeds then talking again furthermore about this destruction of Jacob. But here's a key, guys. This is a key. And most people don't put a whole lot of value on this, but you can't dismiss this. You can't not marginalize this. Notice verse 24. We're still in the same chapter. It's still the same context. Verse 24, last verse, chapter 30, book of Jeremiah. The fierce anger of the Lord shall not return until he has done it, and until he has performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days, you shall consider this. Wow. Latter days, consider what? Chapter 30. You'll consider it in chapter 30. You'll consider that chapter in the latter days. And why?
So this right here was not written to Israel at the time because they were scattered somewhere, you know, and Judah was being captivity. So this only, as you're showing, can only apply to this future time.
Yeah, and they're using the term again and again. And Jeff, that's it. That's the bullseye. Because if you understand that Jeremiah's timeline is that he's in the midst of an invasion by the Babylonians who are taking the Jews into captivity, but he's talking about captivity again. You're scratching your head saying, wait, Jeremiah, what are you talking about again? We're going into captivity now. We're going into captivity now. What are you talking about going into captivity again with our brothers and sisters who are already in captivity 130 years before?
Well, what's interesting is some people will learn if they go to seminary that they say, well, this took place back when Israel returned to the land and they set up the next temple, and that was the fulfillment of all this. That's what they teach. That's what they teach people in college, that this is how it was fulfilled. Yet, what about David? We don't know where David walking around leading Israel at that time.
Yeah.
Right. And there's others.
That's a timeline, Jeff. That's a time. Yeah. That's a benchmark that you've got to take into account in the context of the narrative. Exactly.
Yeah.
And to your point with regards to that, they will teach that. And I lost my train of thought. There was something else I wanted to bring up that you triggered when you were talking. But go ahead. You had something else.
Well, I can also say that there's also those, and this is something that they say that the modern Israel fulfills all that. That when Israel was established after World War II, they believe that establishes that. I'm like, well, where's King David?
Right.
I don't see him. Yeah. I don't see him ruling over Israel, and I don't see an Israel that's living by the laws the way God wants them to live anyhow. So you know, doesn't seem to me to fulfill any of that, even though people will tell you that. Go ahead.
Right. So one of their arguments about David is they will suggest that means Messiah because Jesus came from the line of David. But again, I don't agree with that assessment. I get the reasoning for that. But even when Jesus came the first time, he did not really do all this. Okay, no. They didn't come out of captivity. You know, they didn't come out of captivity 2,000 years ago. So that doesn't fit the scenario 2,000 years ago. Again, they may say it's a spiritual thing that Jesus came for for the future, he's going to set everyone free, and it's all spiritual. But that's not how to read it. It's definitely a physification. There's a spiritual element to it, but this is talking about physical kingdom. Why did the apostles think when Jesus was there he was going to take over from the Romans? This was the mindset of how they read these prophecies. You cannot deny that.
And to support what you're saying, Mike, let me just real quickly, let's go to 31, Jeremiah 31, verse 8. And this is the description here of the remnant of Israel. In verse 7, you'll see that he's talking about the remnant of Israel. Verse 8, behold, I will bring them, who? The remnant of Israel, both Israel and Judah. I will bring them from the north country, gather them from the coasts of the earth, and with them the blind, the lame, women with children, she that travails with child, together a great company. They shall return there. They shall come with weeping, with supplication will I lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of the waters in a straight way, wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of the Lord, you nations. Declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he that scattered Israel will gather him, keep him as a flock, and a shepherd does his flock. For the Lord has redeemed Jacob, ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than he. This is a description of refugees being rescued from their captivity, Mike. And that's to your point of what you were saying.
Yeah.
And that interlocks with the descriptions of Jeremiah chapter 23, Jeremiah chapter 16, of this Exodus that is going to be so enormous at the beginning of the millennium of Israel being brought back to Palestine, the land of Canaan, where they originally were given the promises, and take on and absorb the geography that they were fully intended to absorb all the way east to the Euphrates and, of course, west to the oceans, and become that city on the hill they were intended to become from the start, and commence the millennium with a physical nation that will represent the example nation. God, through Christ and us, hopefully as resurrected spirit beings, will help to spread the gospel as the oceans cover the seabeds. You know, it's such a picture, and it's so exciting when you go into the Feast of Tabernacles with these visions of understanding of what this is all about. And just one other thing I remembered what I forgot, Jeff, when you triggered me. And that is going back to college. You said that they teach the fact that the Jews going to Palestine and this regathering of Jewish folk and Benjamites and a few Levites mixed and mingled in and amongst them is essentially the return of Israel to the homeland. No. Far from it. Because you've got to fulfill the two sticks in the book of Ezekiel. And the biblical definition, this is why Hagee, John Hagee, is wrong. I mean, he's so flat out wrong about the fact of using this as a tool to raise money. And bless his heart, he's raising money for Israel and Judah and so on. But the fact is that a biblical definition of the return of Israel to the land is both houses. Both houses have to return according to the prophecy. And it's a prophecy, the two sticks. A riddle. It's poetic. That's another thing about prophecy. It can be very poetic at times. And it is bringing the two sticks together, Israel and Judah together, to be one nation. And they will go back to the land of Canaan at the beginning of the millennium.
Yeah, it's definitely end time, because if you're saying when they came back from Assyria or coming back from Babylon, that's nearby. That's not from from around the world and from the islands afar off. That is. So for the preterist, it says that already happened. It's like the language doesn't match something that already happened. It's something that is a future fulfillment. And definitely, I would definitely, the argument about Israel in the 40s established, they don't meet any of these qualifications. No. There's no law. There's no things that fit this kingdom at all. It's only a millennial kingdom, as we see.
And again, David's got to be resurrected for that to happen. That you cannot take that piece of evidence out of the mix. That's part of the calculation.
Just notice.
I mean, I would say
one other point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
One other point in in chapter 30, Bill mentioned verse 4. It talks about Israel and Judah. When you get over to chapter 31, it talks about Israel scattered amongst the nations in the distant coastlands. It doesn't mention Judah there, okay? Because Israel is the one that everyone thought was lost. Judah, we still know the Jews throughout history because they did come back to that land once again.
And they've been clannish. I mean, from the time of their departure out of Palestine at the Masada's last stand, because that was the time when they really, the diaspora, occurred in mass. But nevertheless, even though they were dispersed, they were very clannish and they held together. That's why you've got these haplogroups in DNA that can find and reference the Kohan DNA, and so forth, whereby they could be followed down through history because they've been pretty much together. They marry within each other's, circle, so to speak, the network of their family lines and their family trees. And thank God that there is this one tribe still remaining, because it's a validation of everything we've got in this book, because those people, their definite lineage certainly represents a connection to the parting of the Red Sea, the 400 plus years of slavery, and all the things they saw, the burning bush and Moses and Joshua and Caleb, and all so many things that mean so much to all of us. They are a living bloodline of people that go back to those days, and that's great. That's great.
Yeah. And what we saw in the 1940s, we didn't see. I mean, we saw people come from around the world to there, but we didn't see the exact description we read there. That did not happen.
Right.
This is a completely different event than
but
that.
This goes to the point too that I wanted to bring up, which is a close intermingling of this, and I think we're already kind of bumping up on it, and that is prophecy. Number two, prophecy is dual. So number one, understand the timelines of the prophets so that you can better understand the distinction between history and future. But number two is duality. Duality is a very important element to keep in mind as well, because prophecy is dual. There is admittedly pre-fulfillments of particular events and conditions that occurred previous, but of which still doesn't dismiss the fact that they point to the future as well as a pattern that God follows throughout the course of his unfolding of the plan that he's working with,
Absolutely,
yeah, Bill,
absolutely.
I think there's some confusion on that idea of duality or typology, where people think the type is some type of exact replica, where actually a type is just something that is like. It has similarity. It is not exact. And I think people get put off and don't understand that about this,
Exactly. But yet they'll go to the extents, and you guys know this, and Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13 are the perfect example of the preterist out of control. I mean, he takes these three major, the Olivet prophecies, to the point where they render them as historical, and that's it. It pertains only to what happened there during the early years of the church, and all of that was fulfilled. And Mike, Jeff, I can't, you go to any one of them. Which ones do you want to pick? Matthew 24? That's the more popular one.
Yeah.
Okay.
You go through Matthew 24, and then you come down to verse 30 and you say this: and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with, how do you say that was fulfilled? How do you?
Yeah. That's kind of spiritualizing things away.
Yeah, that's as bad as
they do.
Saying in 1974 that what it was all about was the ads in the Reader's Digest. That's what they were talking about.
Let me ask you a question, Bill, about type and antitype, because I guess it does talk about in Matthew and these about the abomination of desolation. And so the abomination of desolation is referred to as something that's still yet to occur. That, but there have been types in history. I think with Antiochus,
Yep.
and also also in Jerusalem around 70 when Jerusalem fell. There's types of this happening, but that's still a future prophecy, and the types don't fulfill all the language that we see of that.
And that goes to Mike's point, because people get confused over that. But again, these are patterns that have value to us. And in the sense of when you go to Daniel 11 and you begin to read about the beast leading up to the verses 40, where the king of the north invades, and we understand the king of the north to be the beast power, invades the Holy Lands and pushes the king of the south out of there, and the king of the south then looks for allies to the northeast, and that's another story. But my point is, the scriptures leading up to, in Daniel 11 up to chapter 40, somewhere around 35 to about I'm sorry, not chapter, but verse 40, is a description of this guy who's going to be basically in the driver's seat. He's not going to like women. He's going to understand, in chapter 8 of book of Daniel, chapter 8, it talks about how he can understand dark sentences. So this guy's going to be, he's profiled there a little bit, and you're going to be able to understand him when you see him on the world's landscape, on the stage of world events. We will be able to recognize him, those of us who are in tune with biblical prophecy, because he'll fit a certain profile. And that's another thing on how you can identify certain prophetic writ, by profile. God gives you a profile, and as a result of that profile, you can begin to recognize certain things to be connected with that item, whatever it is. So these are all things that you got to keep in mind. But certainly, I think to Mike's point, understand that pretypes don't have to be exact,
Right.
I dot T cross, precisely the same way, structure, to that point. No, there's similarities. That's a good word, Mike. Similarities.
Yeah, I think what you said also, Bill, gives a good reason why to teach prophecy, because now there may not be, I may not see this in my lifetime, but somebody eventually in the church is going to see this in their lifetime. So as the church, we got to keep teaching it until somebody sees this, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, I mean, again, it's not going to happen, but at some point it is going to happen in the church, and the church has to be ready. So we have to teach prophecy so that we're always ready whenever this happens.
And a balancing element to that is we don't know. We don't know. Right now, I could digress into a diatribe of policies that are destroying this country. I'll get accused of being political, but nevertheless, I'm talking about policies that all of us know are destroying the country. One of the most outstanding ones is this just no immigration policy. I mean, it is so soft. The nation is being diluted and stolen right out from underneath us. So that's a story of itself, the rise of crime and so on. But my point is, we still don't know. We might recover from this. Look at the 1930s. From 1930 to the end of World War II, 15 years, you would have thought the world was ending. Herbert Armstrong did think the world was ending. He was preaching that Germany was the beast and that Hitler was the dictator and so forth. So it's
if I was living then, I probably would have agreed with him.
Yeah,
because it looked like it.
Exactly. So we got to keep these things in context, knowing full well, and to your point, Jeff, not ignore them, because I wrote down just 3 items here of why do you think prophecy is important? 3 items. Why do you think prophecy is important? You just hit on it, Jeff. 1, it serves as a warning. It provides information of how to improve the nation's relationship with God. That's important. So that's the church's responsibility. Witness, warn, be the watchman on the wall, and tell the people their sins and give them reason to be warned so that they can feel it in their hearts and be motivated to change. 2, provides reason why a nation is at risk. It gives edification, understanding about what we're doing wrong and what needs to be changed. It identifies the patterns that brought original Israel and Judah down, so that hopefully we, as a nation that has embraced the God of Israel, don't repeat those things and are eschewing those same obstacles, those same holes and bumps that Israel and Judah before us didn't get over. And 3, fulfilled prophecy proves the Bible. It proves the Bible. You know, you look at the prophecies of Jesus Christ, born in Bethlehem, Psalms chapter 22, where Jesus was, basically almost word for word experiencing what David was writing down there in Psalms 22. Amazing. How does that happen? It happens through the Holy Spirit that God is using to thread that line, that reality of his plan, providential plan throughout human history. And that's important.
There's so much fulfilled prophecy that we have to really just understand the rest is going to take place. That, because there's all that evidence that it will, because God has done a lot of what he said will happen, and it all follows his plan. And if you understand his holy days and understand, the word, you can see that plan.
Some have found over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament pertaining to Jesus Christ, not only his first coming, but his second coming. Over 300 prophecies just on him, and many of them have been fulfilled already.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing, and it is important to us as Christians when we see these writings. I mean, I've often said this, I'll say it again, Nostradamus has nothing over the Bible, because when you really do get into the Bible and begin to, peel back the onion skins, the layers of the onion skin, there are so many things like what you said, Mike, that prove, how could this be? These people lived hundreds of years. Look at the name Cyrus. Can you imagine being Daniel? I've often thought about this. I sit in my back patio with a little glass of wine, and I think about how it would be to be Daniel. There he is. He's been in captivity now for who knows how many years. He's maybe 80 years old, 75 years old, who knows? But he now knows Cyrus is alive. He's got the writings of Jeremiah, so why wouldn't he have the writings of Isaiah? So with the writings of Isaiah and Jeremiah, I know he's got Jeremiah because he knows Judah's going to be in captivity 70 years, and that was written in Jeremiah. So we know he's got Jeremiah's scroll. So let's say, assume, of course, but nevertheless, I think it's a plausible assumption that he's got Isaiah too. So now he's got Isaiah stating Cyrus is going to be God's anointed, and that Cyrus is going to release the people. And this was said, about 130 years before Judah went into captivity with Babylon. And now there he is. He's been in captivity, I don't know, 50, 65 years, maybe 55 years. But he's wondering, at least I would be, this would be me. I know how I am. I'd say, man, how long have we been? When did it start? I could figure it out. When would it start? Maybe we've been in 55 years. Cyrus is alive. We're going to be freed here shortly. I know it because Cyrus is alive. Is it? I mean, that would be cool. And how did now Daniel know that was from God? Because of prophecy. And he was sure in his heart and his mind that what he was involved with was a providential, real-time experience while it was in real time playing out. That's exciting. I don't know about you guys. I'll tell you what, my hair, what little I have, would be standing up on end,
Yeah, definitely. When you read about punishment coming on Jacob or Israel in the end times, that there is some other Israel, we have to try to put those pieces together. And hey, we could be wrong, but when we look at the world today and we look at the geopolitics, is there an Israel out there? And I think we know what that is, at least right now today. It makes a lot of sense, our ideas about that prophetic scenario.
And that is so important to recognize. But again, I say to balance this out, we don't know if the collapse that's promised to those peoples, those cultures, is now about to be put upon us. You could say, it looks like it. It looks like, man, because the country is really polarized. There are definite lines of demarcation of, this and that, yin and yang. But I'll tell you, the bottom line is we still don't know. And so we've got to be balanced in our approach.
I think California's first. If there's going to be captivity, California's first.
Well, you could be right. Because you move from left to right. Unless you're reading Hebrew.
But again,
I'm just kidding,
not many people were cognizant of this when Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel were talking about it. Just like today, as we see Christianity decreasing in the United States, the United Kingdom, Christianity has already fallen much further than the United States. This writing is on the wall. If we claim the biblical God, well, the biblical God says, when you claim me and you don't follow me, this is what's coming for you.
And he will hold those people. The pattern shows he will hold those that embrace him accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. In other words, he's got expectations on us, and that goes even individually. You could be located in Africa. You might be over in India. You might be in Bangladesh, wherever, Philippines. But the bottom line is, if you embrace the God of Israel, you are going to be held accountable. And so therefore, the pattern is that you better abide by the God of Israel's values and standards and laws. Otherwise, the pattern shows that there is punishment and or a spanking that's up ahead for you if you don't, get your act together, so to speak. One last point, guys, point 3, and we touched on it real quickly here, but point 3 would be the witness and the warning. We touched on it in passing, but it really is important because, to your point, Mike, as the church goes forward and Christianity continues to plummet and decrease, it is going to become harder and harder to hold our ground as Christians, because we're going to become more and more of a minority as a culture begins to veer off into these progressive sins of malcontent and confusion and immorality and all the things that we're seeing materialize and manifest as we see. So it's going to become, as I pointed out in my sermon last Sabbath about this is not a drill, illustrating the fact that there are scriptures where going ahead, Christians even are going to betray one another. We're going to be arrested and taken before governors and authorities to give a witness for why we're making the stands that we're making. And so this becomes very important that people begin to understand that this is not a game. This is not a drill. This is the real deal. And your recognition, Mike, and bringing forward the idea that Christianity is already on a decline, which it is, that is a realization and reality check that we as Christians, we better be brave, we better be bold, and we better be courageous and work on those characteristics and attributes as we go forward into these days, because it's not going to become any easier, and especially for the ministry,
I guess one thing about witness and warning, and that reading prophecy, or whoever you are, whenever you lived, reading prophecy provides you a personal warning. It shows you God's expectations and shows you what God's judgment is against sin and against not living up to the expectations that God has. And so I know, just like Ezekiel, God told Ezekiel, he said, "So here's what I want you to tell people. I want you to go lay down on your side. I want you to roast food over poop. I want you to do all this stuff, but they're not going to listen to you." So for us, the church, we're the ones in the church. We got to listen to God, because the rest of the world is probably not going to listen to it, but we got to listen to it. And to Bill's point, not let ourselves become involved in this world. We can't have us embracing the culture that is that is there, that culture of sin that is growing in our society. We have to remain solid.
We can't be afraid to address those issues and policies that we see are detrimental to the overall righteousness and holiness of a culture that should be rising above this muck that we're finding ourselves being dragged into and dumbed down into. I don't know about you guys, I cannot believe in some cases the stupidity of our leaders and the contradictory hypocrisy that we're seeing today blatantly in the open. I mean, you don't even have to really be all that intelligent to see how just blatantly hypocritical some of our leaders are. And again, it goes to the prophecies. I wrote it in the article, by the way, in the International News, of the one I just wrote, about how our leaders in the end time of the nations that are carrying the culture as Israel would choose leaders that were immature, that were baby types, and would lead us as a nation into troubles. And that's what's happening.
Hey, Jeff, I don't know if you can put Dale Lloyd's comments up. I'm just not sure what he means by them.
Yeah, I'll let you read them. Let me let you read them and you comment on it, okay?
And the churches are not speaking the truth, also part of the problem. So, Dale, are you speaking about the churches of God or the Christian churches in general? I'm not sure what you mean by that, and I don't know who Terry R. is, who went back into LCG. These guys don't even listen to the comments that can be God revealing information. So I am listening, Dale. That's why we're putting up your comment right now. We are listening, buddy. So if you could just clarify your point in the first comment, I'd be happy to listen to it.
Yeah, definitely. I don't understand it because, again, I don't know much about LCG to understand what he's talking about. But again, the churches of God, as we will see next week, looking forward to next week, are definitely a mixed bag. And next week we'll be speaking with someone from a church of God who has gone off the rails, so to speak, with prophecy. And we'll be learning a little bit about that.
Okay, so I think he's talking about
that shooter
shot
up in
the
Minnesota.
church, the shooting, in the Midwest, maybe that occurred.
I think it was up in
the
Minnesota.
Church of God people who Minnesota. Okay, somewhere in the Midwest, I remember.
Yeah,
but I don't get the point that he's making.
So
I think he's saying that God. I think he's saying that God had removed protection from that church for some reason. And again, I'm not agreeing with what he's saying, but I believe that's what he's saying or whatever there. And I don't know enough about any of this to make any comment on that. All right, but do definitely thank everybody for making comments.
Okay, what he's saying, what he's saying is most churches, unlike CGI, don't allow this type of interactive that we provide, where people can question us, they can comment about different. We're open to feedback. We're open to conversation within CGI, and amongst some of the other churches out there, I guess he's saying that is not allowed, that there's a party line that you have to follow. Maybe that's what he's getting at here.
One last comment to his point. What happened there in Minnesota, if it was Minnesota, but referencing that mass shooting in particular, in my humble opinion, so to speak, is not that that indicates anything about God not protecting the church and so forth. It indicates, frankly, that we're all subject to time and chance. In due respect, there's a time for everything, as Solomon pointed out in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we've got to be vigilant and careful and take precautions and not be silly or negligent or reckless or cavalier about living in the world we're living in today. Walking down the street, our brethren in New York City, our brethren in Chicago, hey, we in these big cities, whether it be Houston or even Cleveland, Detroit, we're subject to time and chance. Be careful. Ladies, when you go to your car and fill it up, take your keys, as I've often said, put them in your purse. Don't let your keys stay in the ignition. Take them out of the car, put them in your purse, and then go fill up your gas and fill it in a place where there's a lot of people and lights, and do it during the day most of the time. I mean, we got to start thinking like this. Otherwise, hey, we're subject, time and chance. Anything can happen to anybody, anywhere, at any time.
Yeah, we all have people within our groups who do have some mental issues. I've dealt with that within my churches. And again, this can happen anywhere. It's not necessarily God removing his protection. I mean, we could go out and get into an automobile accident, and that's happened to people in the church. I get your point there, Dale, about the heavy-handedness of some ministries and ministers. And again, we don't want to do that. We want to have dialogue. We want to be servants of the people as elders within the church. That is the example that Jesus set. So I think we can all agree on that.
He
Yeah,
mentioned Wisconsin, not Minnesota. So that point taken, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned
Yeah,
that Terry fellow was a member of the church. I was unaware of that. He was a member of the church.
Yeah.
yes,
So
you remember that. Yeah.
So one thing, I guess, and getting back to what we're doing here in this show is that that we in the CGI, we believe in this open discussion that we can prove all things. That if there's something that's true, that it can withstand people's questions about it. Right? If you have a question about something you don't understand, it can be subject to scrutiny, and that's what we're doing here. Is we will look at the different sides to see if it prove all things, hold
Yes.
fast to what is true.
Speaking of different, I would debate Dale on the point that when someone does have a mental illness, that these happen. So there is an element of time and chance involved in that. Having dealt with people with mental illness, have done volunteer work with these people. Again, they are not in the general population. They can explode just like anyone else in the general population on a when they have the ability to do so.
I'll tell you, Mike, though, to your point, I mean, people are volatile today. Did you see that guy with the axe at McDonald's there in New York and Manhattan the other day? I mean, they're just volatile. People get triggered very, very easily nowadays, and we got to be careful, in terms of handling folks. And that's why I like the Church of God International so much, because we focus ourselves around servant leadership, servant eldership, as opposed to a heavy hand. He was mentioning, the ministries of Perhaps Living and Philadelphia, and of course David Pack. I mean, just heavy hand kind of stuff.
And for y'all who are interested in him, we'll be talking about him next week with a former employee who was kind of high up in the organization.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff, has to do with how these people are triggered, frankly, with the way they were handled. And as a result, the consequent being, depending on the person's mental wellness or illness, can cause who knows what kind of reaction,
All right. So it looks like we're getting a little bit past our time. So I just want to offer Bill, do you have any final thoughts or anything you would like to say? As far as I think we lost Mike. Maybe we'll get him back in a second. Anything you'd like to say as we conclude this?
I think pretty much. I didn't think we would cover everything, but there are some other things like prophecy's poetic. There's certainly things about prophecy that are even embedded within other prophecies in the book of Micah and other parts of Jeremiah and so on. So, learning the three things that we basically said will give you a good foundation on how to study prophecy. I think we have a good booklet for those of you who might be interested in, can you understand prophecy? It's a booklet written, goes back quite a few years, and is available on our website. And I think we'll add to what we talked about today and give you a study piece of material that you can use, not to speed read, but you could actually use to help you study along and augment what we've introduced you to here on today's program.
And, also, if you go to our website, our app, go to the Bible study section. I know Bill has done several studies about prophecy, and Adrian and others. There's a lot. There's so much you'll have years, trying to study along what we have. So if you're interested, go to look at the book that he mentioned, and also there's a lot of other material, a lot of other prophecy series that we have in our app and on our website to listen to and to study along with.
And we've got one web chat coming up that Mike and I did here on his last visit, titled Understanding Prophecy. That'll be coming up here after the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll be releasing that.
Sounds awesome. All right, we're going to say goodbye to everyone, and we'll see everybody next week on another edition. Goodbye.